Hey, what's up, everybody? Uh, Thanks for joining us on a special From the Farm live podcast. Today, I'm here with Alexia Kulwiec.
Cool look. Yeah. Great.
Kulwiec, I got it. Nice. All right. Yeah, we're here with Alexia today for this conversation. Alexia is she's the executive director of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Um, I've known about you guys for couple of years now, became a member a year ago. Really, I just wanted to, we have a small homestead, don't sell anything direct. I've sold direct to consumer for a couple of different brands I had started over the years, and the complexities are enormous. And that's why you guys exist. Not just the complexities, but then the issues that people deal with, even if they're following the rules. A lot of times in my experience, the people enforcing the rules don't always know the rules.
Yeah, it's true. It's complex. And frankly, what I always say is our regulatory system was intended not for smaller direct to consumer folks, but like these large 10,000 cattle operations, et cetera. So they don't quite know what to do with us. I do want to point out before we get too far that, we have members that do things other than direct to consumer.
Okay.
But when started, obviously, that was sort of the focus. So
great. Yeah. What are those? So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how you got into this, and kind of a brief background of farm to consumer before we get into it.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, what I'll say is how I got into this was really doing some food systems work, got interested in sustainable agriculture at an academic level, and really, really interested in regenerative ag, and trying to decide how I could best assist in this endeavor. And then finally woke up one day and realized, hey, I'm a lawyer. I could probably figure out something that people need. And I did go back and actually study more and got an advanced law degree in food and agriculture law, and then found this organization looking for an executive director. And so this organization, being Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, is a 501c4 nonprofit organization. And for those listening, what does that mean? We're membership based, and we are not a public charity, although most of our members, our membership is quite low. It's $175 for a farmer member. And most of our members certainly are such that couldn't afford counsel otherwise. And once someone's been in for about 6 months, we provide unlimited legal consultations. We will provide legal representation when we feel it's furthering the mission and it will help others. And by that, I mean representation before administrative agencies. These are your Department of Ag, your Department of Health, and in litigation when we see that it's appropriate. Which means court, basically, right? So we don't guarantee that, but we often do provide that. And we are most active, I would say, in the regulatory system. So in other words, for a small farm to have to worry about following federal law, state law, maybe their county or township or the Department of Health, getting the permits they need, understanding the zoning that they live in, that kind of thing can just get really arduous. So I would say a good amount of our legal services are helping people through the regulatory system. We also do try to do some policy work, working towards changing policies to make the system a little bit more scale appropriate. In other words, pushing for regulations to treat the 2 Jersey cow operation different from the 10,000 cow operation. We've had some successes at the state level, seeing cottage food laws get passed, for example. Federal level has been pretty tricky of late, but we are still doing some work in federal policy as well. So both legal services, a lot of consultation, some straight up representation where we have an attorney network throughout the country that we may call on for litigation and that kind of thing. And then some policy work and some educational work. We're still in the process of creating more educational materials, and I hope to be creating more in the future. It's one of my goals for 2026.
Yeah, great. Man, you guys are no shortage of work, unfortunately.
No. No shortage, yeah.
I'm definitely grateful you guys are out there because that, like you said, the system is designed to make it difficult.
Yeah.
And so as there is a big shift, producers and consumers alike are now looking for each other. Right. I was on a podcast earlier today, and we were talking about cow prices being so high that a lot of folks are like, oh, great, I don't have to go direct. However, we always see a boom and bust. And my concern is for those folks that don't have an alternative source of revenue for their livestock or for the whatever they're producing when those markets fluctuate like they do.
Yeah.
We have such low cow numbers now, we may not see that. And it's kind of a scary thing. That's a supply shortage issue if we don't see it, but who knows? But I mean, when I started selling beef direct to consumer for my cousin's ranch. And so all the legalities and, especially because when we started selling, it was towards the end of 2019. And, when COVID hit, we were squeezing into any processor we could get into. Now the dynamics of how we're selling it legally changes, because if it's USDA, well, that's pretty straightforward, very simple. Sure. I can sell, for the consumer that doesn't know any better, if it goes through a USDA facility, they can process it. I can put it in a freezer, and I can, of course, there's other laws and rules that you got to be following, but essentially I can put it in my freezer and sell it to you, the customer, as we connect or as you need it. Yeah. If it's state inspected, that changes now. And by the way, USDA, if you are buying from me outside of my state, I can ship it to you because it's USDA inspected. Correct. It's federally inspected, and you're across state lines. If you go state inspected, and correct me anywhere I'm wrong here, Alexia, but state inspected, now I can sell it to you already packaged, but within only my state borders. Correct. And you, can I ship it to them if they're within the same state, or do they have
if it's within the state? Yes, but it's not supposed to be sold across state lines. Right. Although a consumer, of course, can come into your state to purchase that meat, right? Yeah. And I'll just say this meat processing issue it continues to be one of the most frustrating, I think, for smaller producers. Is one of the best examples of a law that was intended for large, corporate owned operations. And you're right. In COVID, we saw a real problem with getting into these places. And just for consumers, I just want to add what's really frustrating is we know that you're more and more interested in buying from your local farms and ranches, and it's fantastic. And you need to understand that the regulatory system there that's governing those smaller producers is really challenging, right? So we are always looking to connect with more consumers and make sure they understand this and just get on our list so that if we've got legislation pending or something, they can have their voices heard, because I think a lot of people just don't understand how difficult it is to sell direct to consumer. And it really is a challenge legally. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and then and you, I don't know if you know this, but so I've been involved in policy work as well, which this last year was very busy. We did 4 or 5 trips to DC with Secretary Rollins. Some of them had other members of different cabinets. Like we had a meeting with Rollins and Kennedy in one. Sure. We did do a meeting with 4 small slaughterhouses, each doing something different. And it was with Secretary Rollins and FSIS. And we're talking about a lot of the regulatory burdens on the processing side. Yeah. Which, the more regulatory hurdles to jump through, the more expensive it is to process the meat, because that's what it costs the slaughterhouse. Sure. Yeah. And so then there's a third category, which is custom exempt processing. And custom exempt means the animal has to be processed and returned to the owner of the animal. So I can't process that animal and then sell you frozen meat if you haven't already purchased it. You've actually got to buy that animal and be put on the brand inspection, I guess, depending on the state you're in. Some states I don't think require that. But in Utah, we have brand inspectors at the slaughterhouse. So when we drop that animal off for processing, if it's a custom processor, the name of the customer has to already be on that brand. And correct me if I'm wrong, but some states will determine the different volume that you can break it into. So I could break it into I think an 1/8 was the smallest I was allowed in the state of Utah. So I could sell an 1/8 of a beef In other words, I could put 8 people on that brand,
Right.
and each got an equal portion of what they purchased in eighths. But everybody had to be listed on that brand for the slaughterhouse to be able to process it and give it to that consumer. You're not allowed to sell it after the fact.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely how it works. And I think how I would put it is that producers can't use custom slaughterhouses to slaughter animals and process their animals for sale. Rather, custom processors are for processing of an owner's animal for personal consumption and consumption within their family. So you could sell one live animal. The live animal is then taken to the custom processor. The meat is processed, goes back to the quote new owner or the customer who really just wanted the meat in the first place, right? Or you could put a number of people on there. And you're absolutely right, AJ, that it depends on the state as to how many owners, particularly beef, right? Because they're such large animals. But many states will regulate sort of, can you have 4 owners? Can you have 8 owners? And the thing that's important here is the producer can't sell cuts of meat, with potentially the exception in Wyoming, but they're selling shares of a live animal. So you just get an eighth of a processed cow, right? Yeah. So there's certainly disadvantages to this system, but it is a way to be able to have rancher farm fresh beef that's grass fed and brought to custom slaughter. And the consumer can know the producer and have more faith in it this way. Sure.
Yeah. But that also leans into one of the reasons it makes it more challenging, because to sell an animal before it's harvested, especially truthfully in an environment where we're conditioned for instant gratification. I bought it, I want it, right?
Right.
But I have to sell this to you prior it to being processed. And then those other challenges that means I have to have a date scheduled for a processing facility, and I've got to make sure it's sold by then.
Right.
And let's say I'm a rancher. I'm not. We run the platform, but I've been in these positions. I'm busy ranching, raising animals, but now I also have to market my beef and have it sold before the date I have it scheduled, because I can't sell it after if we're talking about custom. Whereas
and you can't sell the meat. You have to sell what you're
animal.
Selling is a portion of a live animal. So it is trickier. And, certainly some consumers don't really want to have to get into that. I find it, I like to reflect on back in COVID when more people were figuring it out. You couldn't buy like a big deep freezer for your basement because they ran out, right?
They sold out.
Because people figured it out. Yeah. But at least it's a way, I know in a lot of places, these slaughterhouses are far away. You have ranchers that have really done fantastic jobs of raising these animals according to welfare standards, kept them on pasture, kept them on grass. They've never been hauled anywhere, that kind of thing, no antibiotics, etc. And then all of a sudden, before they're slaughtered, they have to go 400 miles away. It changes things. It changes the taste. It changes their stress. It changes how the animals are treated. And the custom slaughter offers an alternative, though not perfect.
Yeah. And so what about rules in regards to processing on farm? So one of the things that I'm always concerned about is the food supply chain, moving the animal, processing the animal, getting the meat then into the place for the consumer to receive it. All of those things, that makes up very simply the food supply chain, right? And so now on farm processing, let's say I'm hungry, I need the food, and you can't get a date because your slaughterhouses are full for 8 months, 9 months. If it's custom processed, and I'm assuming different states have different rules on, well, I bought it from you, Alexia, you're the rancher, you know how to process it. Can I just have you process it on your farm and pick it up when it's ready?
Yeah. And the short answer in more places is no, most places, right? And I'm glad you raised this because it's frustrating because we say, oh, this custom exempt is a great loophole. But if the rancher doesn't operate a custom slaughter facility, it really also complicates things. And the short answer is really, if you want to process on your farm, your options are, to be a custom processor to set yourself up that way, consider mobile slaughter units, which I understand haven't turned out to be sort of as economically feasible as we would like.
Yep.
But having somebody come onto that property with the mobile slaughter, and that could be USDA, that could be state, that could be custom.
Yeah.
I think that in some states, it's a little dicey, but if the rancher retains, say, like you used your example of 8 people that are owners, and the rancher is one of them, can the owners process, and you're processing along with them, or teaching people how to process that animal? Sometimes there are ways that you can do that, but you can't really process an animal for someone else, right? As the producer, as the rancher. I'm curious, AJ, if I might throw in here, and we can talk about it later if you want, but there are 2 pieces of federal legislation pending to help with this regard. And I just didn't know if you were going to talk about that or what you were thinking.
Yeah, please. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the 2 federal, and we need it to be federal, I want to point out. A lot of what we do at Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund is actually state law and local laws. But when it comes to meat processing, everything is really regulated by the Federal Meat Inspection Act. And even states that want to let people do whatever they want, like Wyoming, run against barriers because of the federal law, right?
Yeah.
So federal law says it's got to come to this USDA or a state facility or a custom facility. The 2 things that are pending right now in Congress are the Prime Act. Mm-hmm. And the Prime Act would allow for producers to use these custom processors and then sell by the cut. Right, to actually be able to sell meat that's gone through a custom processor. I mean, I just think this would be such a nice local solution. Want to point out to folks that custom slaughter facilities are regulated. Mm-hmm. They're not just, right? Like, you have to meet certain requirements, have the right sinks, have the right hot water, have the right access to clean walls and clean floors, etc. The big difference between a custom slaughterhouse and a USDA slaughterhouse is that USDA slaughterhouses have inspectors on site for each and every slaughter and all the processing of the animals. That's not true in a custom slaughter facility. They're inspected, they're expected to meet regulations, but there's not an inspector on site at all times for each slaughter. So I just like folks to know that, because sometimes people are like, ooh, that doesn't sound good to not have an inspected facility. They're still pretty good places, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the way I look at it, though, is how many times do we hear recalls for food that came through inspected facilities?
Yeah.
I mean,
most of them. Yeah. I mean,
all food that you hear is recalled came through a USDA FSIS inspected facility, and yet it's making people sick, in many cases killing some people, and they have to issue these massive recalls. We hear it all the time. The other side, too, is generally my personal experience is when you go to these family or privately run processing facilities, whether they're custom all the way up to USDA, but privately run, there's a level of pride in their operation because it's their name.
Yeah.
They're not a corporation. They're not behind Tyson when the Tyson recall happens. It's this person's processing facility that had the issue, and they know that. And so just because they're custom exempt, I've been in some really clean, I mean, most of them, they're very clean processing facilities because they have this level of like, this is mine. My name is on this. And yeah.
I would say that's kind of true for independent producers, generally farms, ranches, food producers, meat, poultry, dairy, that people will say, well, if you want less regulation to have it be scale appropriate, is that safe? Yeah. Right. And the answer is what you've just said, that like, if I as a producer get you sick, I'm done. Right. Yep. Like that business is gone. And so you do tend to see, I think, greater, more stringent standards, frankly, followed than you do with a lot of the larger operations. There is one additional pending federal law I just want to touch on called the Local Foods Act.
Yes.
And that one is a little bit nuanced, but it goes right to what you were talking about, AJ, which is finding a way for somebody to purchase a live animal or share in a live animal and then have that producer be able to have that processed on farm. And so what that would do is basically say, as an owner, I can I can hire an agent or an itinerant slaughterer, for example, to come onto the farm and process this, or to come on my property and process it for me as the new owner without having to take it to custom slaughter. And I think this is a really important law that doesn't require an awful lot in terms of passage or regulation. And in fact, as I understand it, it's an area in which I think some people had already been hiring sort of agents or slaughterers to do this for them. And it was sort of overlooked or accepted by the USDA, but it's not ever been made official. And so in these days, it's pretty important to make these things clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with any of the work being done towards allowing state inspected to be sold e-commerce?
So to be sold across state lines.
Across state lines via e-commerce.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am aware of efforts. I don't know of a pending bill that would amend the Federal Meat Inspection Act that would allow that, but I think that would make sense. I suppose I will say there's some kind of interstate shipment program that if both states meet, the USDA requirements, they will allow some interstate shipping. So there are some states where you can do it depending on the state's certification and the kind of state facility that the producer is using. But again, it would certainly be better to just have a system where the producer knows they can go to this place and get it done, and I can come get that meat, or just come right to the farm to get it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about the meat side. Mm-hmm. Produce. Do you guys have you worked with many people in the produce side? Because one thing I learned getting involved in what we're doing, produce was co-opted by big corporations a long time ago. There's far fewer vegetable growers selling at market or anything like that, even than ranching, and that's not doing well. So, I learned about the farm
FSMA.
Food Modernization Act.
Yes, the Food Safety Modernization Act. Yeah. Yes.
Tell us about that and how that affected farms then and how it continues to affect them now.
Yeah, sure. So the Food Safety Modernization Act was a law that was enacted in the Obama administration, and it was intended to provide greater protections against foodborne illness, right? And it really was passed in a time that was already after the time period that you're talking about, where most of this produce had been grown by very large organizations, very much in the Central Valley in California. And so some of these things at these huge operations, corporate-owned operations, make sense, like making sure certain sanitation requirements are met, making sure that there's sufficient irrigation or water, and that the water tests to be clean and not sort of bringing its own environmental hazards, to ensure that if you're doing livestock and meat as well, that there's no sort of cross-contamination, that manure can get into the produce, etc. So what I'm most familiar with under FSMA is, of course, the produce safety rule is just one of the new rules under FSMA. I guess it's not that new anymore. And these things catch up with me.
Yeah.
What I will say about FSMA in terms of our membership is that particularly unlike meat, the produce safety rule does have some scale appropriate exemptions. So if you are a tiny producer, i.e. only selling less than $25,000 worth of produce in a year in revenue from produce, you're completely exempt from the law. So that's nice for some of our folks. There's also something called the qualified exemption. And most of our produce producers fall under this, which is, I think I'd have to double check all the details, but essentially if you're selling more than half your food direct to consumer and you're selling less than $500,000 in revenue from your food products, you get what's called a qualified exemption, which basically means you have to keep records. If there's a problem, they can figure out who got sick from what, but you don't have to necessarily satisfy all of the detailed safety regulations that non-exempt operations would.
I see.
So where I've helped members a lot is in establishing this, helping them explain to agencies that they are in fact a qualified exemption producer. What we see a lot of, I've seen several times anyway, is like an agency coming in and saying they need to inspect. And we say, no, you don't have to inspect because they have a qualified exemption. You have a right to see records, but there's no right to come onto property and inspect. And I'll hear things from the agencies like, well, we have to come onto the property and check it out to see if you're exempt. But if you come onto the property to see if I'm exempt, you've just like gone ahead and ignored the exemption. So we've worked with a lot of people in trying to enforcing that and providing information on the laws, volunteering the records that they need to see to establish that they are in fact a qualified exemption and help them deal with that. I mean, some folks don't mind. They'll say, fine, come check it out, right? Like it's a clean operation. If you are larger than those that meet the qualified exemption, then the requirements are pretty detailed, right? Like maybe you have hired labor and there's details for them. There's details about washing. There's details about manure. There's details about water quality, et cetera, et cetera. And it does get, I think, pretty detailed in terms of what the requirements are on the producer. Of course, we also have producers doing produce that don't face issues with FSMA, but might be facing issues with, can they sell directly from the property? Is a farm stand a retail store? Yeah. Can they bring it to the farmer's market? So like all of those business permits and licensing issues also come into play with the sale of produce.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
How much of the work when you guys do this kind of work, how often do you see the issues that the farm is dealing with is more related to the individual employee versus the actual rule or regulation of the agency they work for? Because I know from working, I ran a USDA slaughterhouse for a year and a half, long enough to know that I'm not good at it and it's very complicated.
It is, yeah. I couldn't do it.
But what I definitely learned there, because then I consulted for a couple of operations after on the consumer direct side, not on running a plant. And it was very clear the USDA rep you were assigned would make your life hell, or they would be an incredible partner.
Correct.
So in your work in just across the board with the different places, how often is that one of the issues that you end up dealing with?
Yeah, I would say that's a very common issue. And you're right, not just in meat processing, but across the board. That what we have in terms of the regulations for a farm or ranch is you will have a statute. This is either a state statute or federal statute, agreed to by U.S. Congress or your state legislature, and it is, quote, the law, right? Very often the statutes are very broad, very vague, and they delegate powers to local agencies to issue regulations to enforce this law. So there's a number of things that we see. Certainly those have to be done properly according to what's called a notice and comment procedure, right? Giving the public the ability to weigh in on that. But even once those regulations are in place, we see a large number of inspectors when it comes to meat, other folks, if it's just it could be a Department of Ag employee, it could be a Department of Health employee, who say our department's position is X, Y, and Z, or the guidelines or the guidance. If you go on most of their websites, they provide guidance and they provide, they'll say, this is how our program works. This is the permit that you need. And then I'll look at the regulation and it won't say you need this, right?
Yeah.
And they'll just say, well, this is our guidelines. This is what's best. And so we ask people to do this. And sometimes it's not a problem. I mean, sometimes some of these things aren't that complicated. And then at other times, it requires an awful lot of the producer and it's not required by law. And we'll push back and say, I tell our members all the time. And so for anybody else watching or listening, show me the authority for what you're asking of me. Like, I don't want to be a pain, but show me the law and regulation where it says I have to do this, because I'm not finding it. I'm not finding it. Right. And, a lot of times, what I'll say is a lot of times I will push back based on that the fact that that's somebody's interpretation. but then typically we'll resolve something and not have it get adjudicated either with an agency or the courts. The challenge to this is that you're right, that once you get assigned someone, that person is basically the person responsible for overseeing your business. And you could succeed in your interpretation of one law that they're coming after you under, but then they could be showing up for 6 other laws and they're going to choose you and they're going to get in your face and they're going to be a problem. So sort of balancing how best to enforce and work with these inspectors is really complex. And I think it's a very frustrating truth that these government regulators or inspectors, look at things differently. And so it may be the regulation even says one thing, but it doesn't make any sense for a small producer. And you might have an inspector or regulator that just overlooks something for years. And then somebody else steps in and wants to go according to the book. And now it's going to cost $20,000 of improvements to satisfy. And you've got a small producer that's like, I can't do this. I've been doing it this other way for X number of years. And they'll get driven out of business. So I think it's one of the biggest problems and biggest frustrations is that agencies are often what I consider engaging in conduct that exceeds their authority, their legal authority. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I consulted a short time at a jerky plant in Montana. Mm-hmm. And right when I got there, this problem just started. But these guys had been same brand 20 years, and their packaging was, all branded packaging. And then on the back, there was a window so you could see the cuts of jerky past all of the branding. And there was some, artistic writing that said made from premium cuts of beef. They'd been selling that for 20 years. The new incoming USDA rep said, how do I know that's made from premium cuts of meat? That's misleading. And she suspended the shipment of $500,000 of jerky that was ready to go to the customers they had been servicing for 20 years, like gas stations and things like that. We had to have every single state rep come in, tour the plant to see what we were doing, to then get behind us to argue to get it released. And by that time, I think they had already lost a couple of their customers because they had to fill their shelves. And they couldn't get it released. And it was just because of one new person that came in and had a whole different way and idea of doing it. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I will say there are federal and state labeling requirements. And so saying certain things on your packaging does require sometimes an agency's approval. Yeah. Premium, I'd have to do the research because there's so many of these like nuances, right? But the frustrating thing is what you just said is that it's not crystal clear and that these inspectors will somewhat change the interpretation of the law. So it may very well be that one inspector thought that was perfectly appropriate and somebody else came in and said, premium is one of those words that we need to approve. You can't just say that. And then you got to go through a process to be able to say certain things, right? Yeah. Right. Like you can't say organic unless it's been approved by the National Organic Standards Programs. Most people are familiar with that. So I use that as sort of an analogy. Yeah.
It's a good analogy. Another one that is a simple that for consumers to maybe understand is like there's, new cuts of steak, like a tomahawk. Before it was ever called a tomahawk, the consumers were the ones who drove that popularity. Or Thor's hammer, which is a shank, cut a shank left with the bone on. They called it a Thor's hammer. We wanted to package it and sell it with the label Thor's hammer, but that had never come up. So you would have to go through the whole process.
Yep. It had not been defined by federal law what that is. They call that a standard of identity. And for meat especially, you need the federal government to define what that is before you can just say it.
Yeah. Which in there's some good reasons for that. I mean, like you said, you can't just throw organic on there because you want to. You have to. We require an affidavit, which would be the rancher or farmer writing out their practices to meet the requirement for them to be approved to put. I believe we'll see that for regenerative once they can figure out how to define that. But and it'll be necessary. I mean, to make sure the consumers are properly informed. So you mentioned like a farm stand.
Mhm.
There's a rise in Cumberland sheds that get dropped on a corner with 24-hour access and cameras so customers can go in and shop and buy. They're selling eggs and homemade bread products and all of these kinds of things. I've seen these baker farm stands become very popular. Are you guys seeing?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
so
bakers, like bakery goods? Yeah.
yep. So I'll do
Okay.
baked goods in my kitchen. I'll set up a little shack with an ice box out, in it, and a not donation base, but a place for you to put it's a trust base.
Sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
manning it. You come by, you put your money in. Are you seeing
Yeah.
people come to you for that? Like, what do you see on that? And what are the rules and regulations? And it's going to be state by state, everybody. So
Yeah, that one, it's hard to answer because it's state by state. So what I will say first, like the structure and like just selling directly from the land,
mhm,
most places, if it's a true farm stand, by which I would say like, has a big opening and is not permanent, is not like a concrete building, right? But just sort of an open, true sort of quote stand.
yeah,
Most states that will be you can just have that from your land as long as you're allowed to sell direct to consumer. A few states, and I can't think of off the top of my head, but a few states will require a retail store permit, even for what I would look at as a farm stand, like a wooden structure with like not much go. Thank you. Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
yeah. I was trying to
Right.
find
That's a
the-
pretty fancy one, but
yeah,
yeah, I would consider that a farm stand, and I don't think you would need a retail store permit for those. Like I say, a couple of states you do. So we always look into that for members to make sure we know which ones. The other laws that really come into play here are involved in what kind of products you're selling. So, for example, you mentioned eggs. The federal law says if you have less than 3,000 laying hens, you can sell eggs that are not necessarily licensed or graded. Every state gets to then, have their own input on that, and many states have much more stringent rules. Like maybe it's you can sell a couple of dozen a month. Maybe it's have less than 150 laying hens to be able to not be graded or licensed. So we'll help folks through those kind of regulations. Where we've seen the most changes, the most positive changes for these kinds of operations, I think I would say, is in what's considered cottage food legislation. So these are state laws. And the general rule used to be you couldn't sell like value added food you made in your home kitchen directly to the farm, directly from the farm, pardon me. You needed to have a commercial kitchen license to do that kind of thing. Most states today have what's called a cottage food law that makes exemptions for small producers to be able to make certain products from their farm and make value added products from their farm and sell directly to consumers without the need for that commercial kitchen license. It's most common, almost all states you can do some kind of baked goods. So you mentioned, sort of baked goods, farm stands. Most states that's totally fine. Most will regulate. It still has to be shelf stable. So not with eggs, not with products that would need to be refrigerated, say custards, I think can sometimes be a problem, that kind of thing.
I see. Okay. Raw eggs or something.
Yeah. Obviously, most baked goods have eggs in them. But I suppose like something raw. Yeah. Like more custards maybe is a better example of what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
But we've seen outside of baked goods, we're seeing a wide variety, right? Most states still lean towards saying you can sell products that are, quote, not potentially hazardous, which basically means they're shelf stable. Their pH level is such that no harmful bacteria will just be growing in the product. So this is often pickled products. It could be relishes, jams, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And then in some states, they'll even allow you to sell things that they consider, quote, potentially hazardous, but have some requirements on it.
I see.
So in some states will define like the pH levels that are required, and some states have these huge lists of what you can and can't sell. So it is very definitely state specific, but we have seen an increase in it. It's a great extra revenue source for smaller producers, I think. And that's why we're seeing an increase in it and seeing improvements in the state laws has helped with that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And kind of back to the, you know, being sovereign individuals, the right to choose, like, inform me. I know this came out of your kitchen,
Right.
and I'm an adult, so I get to choose. I would like to have your dough, your sourdough, or
Yeah.
sour
Yeah.
bread, sourdough bread, whatever. So
Right.
does the where does the tallow fall in? Because tallow has become a massive industry for, small industry for small producers. And when I say producer, not just the ranchers or farmers themselves, people are buying the tallow at small slaughterhouses and then making their own with their label.
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of two categories, right? You have tallow for cooking and then tallow for skincare. What do you see? What are the kind of rules? And again, state by state, I'm sure, but
yeah, I would say it's very state by state. I would say for the most part, generally, I have not seen very lenient laws regarding tallow, particularly if it's going to be used in the food supply.
okay.
There's sort of if you're talking about cosmetics or skincare, it really is a whole different line of regulation that frankly I don't know as much about because we focus on food products.
Yeah.
But the bit of research that I have done for members in terms of selling tallow as, say, a direct to consumer, direct from the farm product, most states, I think, still would say that has to come from a processed, like a state or federal processed facility. So I have not been super successful in helping members sell that without meeting sort of regulatory requirements. And I know there's definitely an interest, and this is where I just like all of these laws I said at the beginning, like consumers want this stuff, and the regulations aren't set up, for smaller production.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad I asked that question because I know a lot of people that are just going for it because they don't know that there's regulations to follow, and and the cost of some of these things to either defend yourself or pay if you lose would not be worth taking the risk without knowing for sure. Like I've got my bases covered.
Yeah. And, I'll just say as a little plug for us, this is something we do a lot. Like somebody contacts us and it might be as simple as that consultation. Can I sell tallow from animals I've processed here on farm direct to consumer? And we'll have to check out your local regulations and let you know. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Just popping this up here for everybody real quick.
Yeah. So as long as you're doing that, I do notice on this platform you use, farmtoconsumer.org is our website. AJ, you're scrolling through different sort of educational resources that we have on these different products. And when, our members can just contact us by email and ask a question and it will generate that can get to one of our staff people. It'll generate what we call a contact form and one of us will get back to you. You can always, of course, call us as well. We do have a toll-free emergency number. We try to encourage people to keep that to true emergencies. And then, I'm just looking at what you're pushing through here and explain that we do have, and these are public facing resources. We have a few maps that go state by state, and they will tell you sort of what you can do in terms of raw dairy what are the raw dairy rules on your farm in your state? Sorry, what are the raw dairy rules in your state? What are your pastured poultry rules in your state? Because unlike beef, it is easier for a producer to raise poultry, slaughter it themselves, and sell it directly to the public in most states, as long as you're under 20,000 birds. Some states 10,000, some states even 1,000. So we hadn't talked poultry, so I just slipped that in. But dairy, poultry, cottage food laws, and then the meat map talks about like what you can do. Can I slaughter it on farm and then bring it to a state facility or custom facility, or do I have to bring a live animal? So there's some different rules about what you can do with livestock and slaughtering on your own property. And so those are, publicly available sources to just take a look at your state laws.
Yeah. And when I learned about you guys and became a member and got into that back end, oh my gosh, the relief that an organization like yours existed, where I'm like, oh, I don't have to go and do this all on my own, because
Yeah.
a lot of people do want to, that are in farming or ranching, or people that want to leave the city and go homestead and do this as a
Right.
lifestyle. There's so much that has to go into it, that to have a resource like farmtoconsumer.org, become a member, and then be able to know, like, okay, here's what I'm looking for. But then also, I can't tell you, I think every time, is it Christy or Christine? Christine. Every time I have a call with Christine scheduled, she's always a couple of minutes late. But every time it's because she's getting off of a call with somebody that's got something that they're dealing with. So you guys are very active. I mean, the last call I had, she's like, sorry, I had an emergency, a farm emergency I had to help with. And I'm like, don't apologize.
Yeah, we have those things. Like, there's an inspector that shows up. I need your help now.
Yeah.
That produce safety rule is one that I've had people show up, like, they're here to inspect, but I'm exempt. Yeah. Let's talk it through. Right. So it happens.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Yeah.
So let's talk about raw dairy, because I'm a huge fan. We go through 4 gallons a week in just my house. I probably drink 2 of those myself, and the leftovers get made into yogurt and butter and stuff like that, whatever we don't get through in the week. But, many people, I hear all the time, I really wish I had somewhere to buy it. It's not allowed in my state, or they don't know how to find it. What's that been? What's the, I think you guys even got involved in a helping somebody in Virginia. Here's something I noticed on raw dairy. Prior to this administration, there were so many fights that took a long time. Amos Miller is one of the famous ones, right? Amos was a big deal. Were you guys involved in that, Amos Miller?
No, he used to be a member, but he hired his own attorney for that legal trouble that you're referencing. So
yeah. So then I talked to this guy who's a veteran in Virginia, who has a raw dairy, and he's got members. So these people buy in as herd share members.
Correct. Yeah.
And he's even under a PMA, a private member association, which is something I'm still trying to learn and wrap my head around. But what was neat was the Amos Miller case, and then maybe this administration, knowing some of the work that Rollins is supporting, this guy was getting geared up for a big fight. Right. And I talked to him one
guy in Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think you guys were involved in this. I can't remember his name, but he was getting ready for a big fight. When he got in contact with me, he had just been served. By the time I followed up the next week, it was done.
Great.
So the precedents had been set. This guy was very organized in his records, which is a key factor in what helped him. But it was over with. So that was a good thing to hear, that, okay, there's support now, making sure that these farmers that are doing raw dairy aren't fighting tooth and nail. And I'm sure that's state by state dependent, but
yeah, it is. And we still see fights. And this is an area, I could say a lot about this, but this is one area that I'll say we've seen some states become more lenient, which I think is fantastic for the producers. And it's an area in which I think the state agencies do not support that the state laws have gotten more lenient. And so we have seen, I feel like I've seen sort of increased adversarial relationships between the state and producers, not necessarily cases, but just hostility, right? Because they don't like some of the changes. That's completely my personal opinion. And yes, you cannot sell raw milk, which is, unpasteurized, intended for human consumption. I always like to make that clear. You cannot sell raw milk across state lines under federal law. That means that within a state, states can create their own laws. And so again, it's a patchwork across states. A lot of states, it's perfectly fine to sell raw milk from the farm. You might need a permit, you might not. You might have retail milk sales that are lawful. The requirements to get that permit for retail sales may be really, really difficult. Like, you'd still be a very large producer to do it. And so that leads to what you referenced, which is herd shares, which is very common and I would say lawful in most states. There are a couple still that's a problem, like New Jersey. But in most states, the herd share is similar to, and actually I think predates like what you were talking about with livestock. In other words, I buy a ownership share of a dairy herd, And then the adjuster, the farmer who takes care of the animals, milks the cows, and I can show up and pick up product that I own from the herd that I have an ownership role in.
Yeah.
So it's similar in that I'm not purchasing raw milk. They're not selling me raw milk. I actually own part of this herd. And and the laws allow for consumption, for personal consumption of your own animal or your own herd. So that's why it works, is now I have a personal ownership in this herd. How they work also, of course, unfortunately has a lot of, some states require a lot of details in their agreements. Some states reference, as long as there's an ownership interest, you can do this. And so we do at Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund write and work with our members to write an awful lot of these herd share agreements where we're actually, you have a bill of sale for a share in your herd, and then the customer is also purchasing like a payment arrangement that's a monthly basis for boarding and feeding and caring for the animals. And so it works out nicely. They just, you can kind of guesstimate how much the herd is usually producing. It might go up, it might go down. You get a percentage of that product. You're not guaranteed a certain amount of volume. But it's a way of providing raw milk to folks and to receiving raw milk, where doing so in the retail setting in your state would be perhaps impossible, perhaps unlawful, right? I sit in Wisconsin, and it's not a practical impossibility. It's plain out unlawful. And yes, I think the fact that we're the dairy state has something to do with that. I really do. Big dairy was here, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that the herd shares, I would say I support very much. I think that they're a very good way. So many people have seen so many benefits from this product. It goes back, in my opinion, to adjusters or the farmers really doing a great job in doing things correctly. Because yes, could you have a pathogen, problem in your milk if you're not doing things correctly? Yes.
Yep.
The flip side is in industrial milk, they basically don't care. It's probably full of pathogens, and then they just kill them all off with pasteurization. And that, to me, is really not the ideal. Let's prevent it from the first place, right? So we do an awful lot of those agreements. I do want to give my short caution. I am not a fan of PMAs. I have not seen them work.
Okay.
People, a lot of people, they have been popularized, I think, in a lot of ways. And people think it means we're a private organization, so we are somehow exempt from the law. And that's not what they mean. So if you have a PMA and you are doing meat production and livestock, you cannot slaughter and process meat on your ranch and just sell it to your private members because you're a private organization. The federal government will come in and they will enforce the Federal Meat Inspection Act. The few cases, like in the courts we have seen on this, have not been supportive of PMAs. So I tell people, I know there's folks out there that like the idea. I mean, I love the idea. I just don't think it'll work.
Yeah.
The few court cases I've seen, it hasn't worked. And I'll also just, some of these organizations really plying the agreements, for lack of a better word that comes to mind, aren't lawyers. You don't see lawyers putting their license on the line for these things.
Right.
I think that's kind of telling. So
that's
my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah. That I'm glad you brought that up. It's and it kind of depends on the circles that I'm talking to, where PMAs are very common or trying to be made common.
Mm-hmm.
But even leaving those conversations of just that, I'm not an attorney, but the wider sense in the back of my head's like, I think you're just trying to force something to happen so that you can have do it your way, I guess, which I mean, look, I'm just as frustrated that we have to jump through so many hoops to feed ourselves and to serve, work with our local farmers and ranchers. But
yeah, I want to just say, it's the use of these agreements as a way around all regulation that I think doesn't work. You can always have a private club, and that could be useful if you wanted to run a farm somewhat like a CSA, right? So that the producer knows that they have a set of customers that's going to be purchasing from them. and they're like members of something, that's fine, right? I mean, so there's ways to do things. It's just don't think that gets you out of the regulatory system, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody asked, like, what's a PMA? How are they structured? Private member association. It's like you said, it's like a club. And in simple terms, the folks that are running them believe that once you're a member, there's really no regulation on what they're doing because you're a paying member to be in a club. So you can't tell us what to do because you're a private member of the club.
Right.
I mean,
and that's how they work. They pay to be in it, and then they'll still pay for the products that they purchase as members. But I guarantee you that, federal regulators don't agree that takes you out of the regulatory system.
Yeah. When you become really successful and have a lot of customers, that's when you'll be met at the door by people that aren't happy.
Exactly. Yeah.
In Arizona, there's a company called Fond du Lac Farms.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of them?
Fond du Lac?
Fond du Lac. And they sell raw dairy into Sprouts.
Wait, say that again. I'm sorry.
They sell their raw dairy at Sprouts.
At Sprouts.
Sprouts, it's a grocery store.
Right, sure. You can get a raw milk permit in Arizona. I
was so surprised that Arizona, that they were at, because in many places you can buy it from the farmer, but it can't be sold in a grocery store.
Yeah, you'll see if you look at our map, some states allow for the retail sales. Arizona, that's interesting example because I've learned from my members, our members, that for the most part, you can sell retail in Arizona and get a permit, but the requirements to do so are extraordinarily difficult. So one of the reasons, if you look at our map, is it's a little bit unclear what happens in Arizona, because you could look up the law and they'll say, yeah, you can do this. But then when you walk through the regulations, it's like, several $100,000 to build the kind of facility they would want and that kind of thing. And so if you're large, you can do it. And there are, particularly out in the West, I think a couple of very large producers that can do that. And that's great. They might be our members because they believe in what we do, but they're not sort of our average members, I'll say, who there's no way they could do it that way. That way being getting this permit.
Yeah.
And so they might go for herd shares instead. Although in Arizona, I think, let me see one thing just because you're talking about it. Yeah. Arizona's goofy because the law doesn't specifically prohibit it. But the state certainly takes the position that herd shares are still the sale and are unlawful.
Yeah, somebody did comment that on Instagram that herd shares are not lawful in Arizona.
Right. So Arizona's an interesting outlier, which is why if you look at our map, they're kind of gray because they're sort of like other, like we haven't quite figured them out, and we don't do herd shares in Arizona. And it's difficult for this retail permit.
Yeah. That was another comment. It's really tough to get the licensing. With that said, though, what was interesting, talking with the owner, the value, in other words, the demand for raw dairy, the value they bring to those Sprouts stores that they're sold in is massive.
Yeah, it's great.
They know that a lot of the consumers coming to those Sprouts stores are actually coming there because they can get the raw dairy.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah, I'm looking at it, and that's great.
Yeah,
that someone can make it work.
Yeah, he's got a great operation. He works as it's a family run. They work their tail end off to make it happen. But I was happy to see that somebody was doing something like that.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I have the other states. Some other states do allow for retail, and it's not as hard as that Arizona permit.
Yeah, Wyoming's pretty flexible. We've got a food freedom sovereignty law here that's just. I'm so glad that I live here.
Yeah. Wyoming is really the leader when it comes to food sovereignty, food freedom laws, which are slightly different, but it really is the leader. Wyoming's basically amended that law as much as it can to basically be like, as long as the feds don't prohibit it, sell your food. So Wyoming has a very strong Food Freedom Act.
That's what I tell people all over when they say, what kind of law should we, consumers, we talk to a lot of consumers through our from the farm, and they ask, how can we help? What can, what needs to be done? And I always tell them, look at Wyoming's food sovereignty laws. Every state should have those.
Yeah.
That's like, let's just wave the easy wand. Or, I'm a big fan of Joe Salatin's Food Emancipation Proclamation. Let people choose. Just,
Right.
now I also believe that there needs to be some regulation and labeling,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Sure.
I was talking to a guy who stopped at a fruit stand, thought it was fresh oranges, and he's going through all the oranges, like picking oranges out, and the seller forgot to pull the Costco sticker off one of the oranges. So that's something that people don't know, is that folks are going and buying, they're basically black marketing, if I could call it that,
Probably
food.
increasing the price, right?
Yep.
So just reselling. Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're buying it from a box store and reselling. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess good on you, but if consumer thinks I'm buying it from the farmer that grew it, that's
Right.
misleading and mislabeling, and it needs to be clear.
Yeah, I mean, what I often say is what we need is, and I didn't make this up, I've learned this from some very smart allies of ours. We need scale appropriate regulation, right? We
Yeah.
need regulation that doesn't push out smaller to mid-sized independent producers who aren't part of that industrial food system, and find a way for them to be able to produce and sell to consumers, without exorbitant prices on all of the permits and licenses and food safety requirements. Yeah, I think that's really important, and labeling, and so, there's certain areas that consumers do need to be protected, I suppose. But I think that by and large, these smaller producers having that relationship with your buyer, and they're doing things pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in wrapping up, that was a fast hour. Thank you. I was
Yeah, sure was.
very informative. Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Do you have consumers that get engaged and producers? Like, listen, the work you guys are doing, and you guys know this, but just so the people listening, it's very important. I mean, most of the people I know that are selling direct to consumer don't have the resources to go and hire their own attorney to
Right.
help them battle some of these frivolous things that just
Right.
pop up. And then the bigger ones, and those frivolous ones can turn into bigger ones. And if they have somewhere they can go right away,
Yep.
and then let's say on the other side too, probably the bigger cost is the mental load.
Yeah.
The finance is one thing, but you're already talking about an industry that's been so heavily regulated for so long that sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, is just ready for a fight.
Yeah.
So they're exhausted on top of that. And then they've got these little things to deal with. So you've got your finance side, and then you got the human toll, and they're just producing food.
Yeah. And I mean, most farmers, of course, work so hard that like having this regulatory issue on top of everything else is really difficult. To come back to what you said about like producers and consumers coming together, or consumers engaging in this, there are two central ways in which consumers really engage with us, I guess I would say. One is we do have a consumer membership, which is less expensive than our farmer. And I will admit, we will answer your questions. We will provide you with resources. There's not necessarily a guarantee of legal representation. It's really a way to support the organization, which in turn supports your producers, right?
Yep.
Is a consumer membership. Another way that consumers can be very involved is when we get involved in policy work. So I think it's really helpful when we're doing something at the state level, for example, to have producers come forward and say, we need this change. We need this so that we can, support local economies. We can stay in business, small business operations, but also that consumers want this.
Yeah.
Hearing it from both ends, I think, for policymakers is really important. So when I tell people who are not producers and want to be engaged, even if you don't want a consumer membership, to subscribe to our newsletters, one of the best things I think we do with that list is anytime there's a policy pending somewhere, we do action alerts and say, these are your reps, call them. This is why we need this law, right?
Yeah.
And I know people know this, or a lot of people do, is that like, even if you feel like, oh, my rep is going to vote the right way, you still call, because numbers matter. You don't email because they don't matter anymore. you need people willing to actually make a phone call to legislators' offices. And so thank you. You went up and showed our subscribe button.
Yep.
Just
Here's
love
their
that.
subscribe. You can donate and see what their new news is about.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I like your question because that's kind of been, it's been at the top of my mind for a while. I haven't really resolved it, is how to reach more consumers. So another thing might be for consumers to share this information, share our website. And one of the things I really want to do in 2026 is have some more general materials that aren't quite so niche. And what I mean by that is our producers love us because they can find exactly what they need. But a consumer sometimes might not look at us and see the value or understand. And I want them to sort of get the whole picture, right? So it is important. And those are the areas that I think consumers can be really helpful.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm a broken record when I go to DC, because while we're working on all these other policies that affect the farmers, what needs to happen is a large scale campaign to re-educate the consumers about their local food.
Right.
We've been so segmented that even just the thought that good food is cheap is false. I mean, it's just wrong. It takes a lot to produce. When you're buying cheap food, you bought it because it was produced cheaply, which means all kinds of things.
Right.
Good, healthy food from your local farmer and rancher. I mean, it could be a little less, but not until fuel comes down, fertilizer comes down, seed costs come, all the inputs that they have to do their job. Right. Yes, that when those things are done, food might come down a little bit, but it should never be $2 a pound when or $3 a pound ground beef when Walmart was selling it for that. You're buying food that was processed on a mass scale, that 1 pound of ground beef has, I think I saw a study that had 500 different genetic codes. Meaning they process
many different animals. It's just all mixed together.
Yep. Yeah. So you get what you pay for. But so like even with like RCAF, I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I am familiar with them.
I'm a big fan of what RCAF does. And for them, I'm like, you need more consumers. And like my social media in the last, couple of years, what I've been really grateful for to the American public is how many people are paying attention to their food system. Like,
absolutely.
It's surprising that they are engaged in policy because, we're all busy. We're distracted by the things we want to do, not the things we have to do. But yet millions of Americans woke up from COVID and they want to know what decisions are being made, policy, state, local, federal, for the food I'm feeding my family.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So reaching more consumers. Thank you for doing that work. We're going to keep trying to reach more. And I'll put in a tiny plug too, if I can. We do have a new sister organization called Food of Choice. And that one is a 501c3, and they will be focused more, I think, on reaching consumers in education than precisely what Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund does. So both organizations hopefully will have more for consumers in the next year, but getting involved in getting your voice into the policy efforts is so important, because you're right. Consumers are paying attention and they want to support local farms, and frankly, didn't have a lot of ideas that, they didn't have much idea that the regulations made it so hard, right? They just presume, I think, a lot of times that the large corporate producers can do it cheaper. And so they're like, pushing them out of the system. And that's certainly true.
Yeah.
But there's also regulation. And so, trying to educate people and fix that is a big deal.
Yeah. Awesome. So then on the producer side, let's just make sure we're clear for them as we wrap up the services, how they can get involved, that the movement to go direct is growing. It's necessary for our nation, and not just for our nation, but in many cases, it's necessary for them to stay viable. They need that full retail dollar. So they're making a pivot, taking on extra work. So how do they get involved with Farm to Consumer, and what kind of like high level services do you guys provide?
Yeah, no, really important question. And so for producers, we do strongly recommend that you join. You'll see our farmer membership is currently $175 a year. We do have
very affordable.
We do have a homesteader category that is less, that because homesteaders aren't selling their food typically, but they still may have zoning problems or
Oh,
problems
great.
with local officials, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then we do have a category that is affiliate, and that's if you're like a co-op or a buying club, and so that's a little bit more money because you're working with a lot of different people. In any case, our website explains the different memberships, and what the membership gets you is after 6 months, unlimited legal consultation. In the first 6 months, it's limited to 2 hours. I won't say I'm always perfect about limiting myself to 2 hours, but that's the rule. The idea is we can't exist if people only join when they have a problem, right?
Yeah.
We want people to join so that we're a community supporting one another by paying your dues. When Joe has a problem, we can help him. And when you have a problem, we can help you. But when people come and join for 1 year for their problem and then go away, that can be very difficult financially, right? We're not getting government grants. We're not getting, we're not a public charity. And so being a member before you have a problem is important. But once you've been there for more than 6 months, it's unlimited consultation. 2 hours before then, we will provide legal representation in administrative agencies like Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, and even potentially court, but we don't guarantee it. So it's got to be something that is both within the mission and typically something we think is important to change for more people, not just the one member, typically.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also, we are always working for our producers on changing policy in their locations. And I love trying to get producers that are our members. I'll send a specific message to them when we're working on policy in a specific state. We're working on this in Idaho. Will you come to this hearing? Will you contact people? That kind of thing, to get involved in that and that sort of aspect of our work as well. But for producers, we strongly encourage you to join so that you can get what you need. And I'll just add that, like I say, we do webinars. We're trying to build education. We have membership meetings. Like, I really and truly want it to be more of a community trying to change this system than just transactional, right? And so it's really important to join, not when you need something, but to become part of our community.
Yeah, it's definitely, I get that 100%. It's about becoming the membership, almost like you're part of a movement, and then being there to support that movement, even when your issue's taken care of. Because the reality is we all need resources. You guys have bills to pay, each of you as individuals and as an organization, and $175 for a year is nothing. And collectively with enough people, you can really set people up like yourselves to really go to war when necessary or help prevent it.
Yeah. And, the more of us there are, the more they listen. So like I say, if I can go to a legislator and say, well, I have this many members in your state, they care about that, right?
That's right.
The numbers matter, the phone calls matter, the showing up to hearings matter. So being part of this movement, as you said, I think is a really important aspect of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexia, for being here today. Farmtoconsumer.org is where people can go. Anywhere else you would direct them that they could connect? You guys, are you active on social, or is that really?
We are active on socials. I'm on my own website to remind myself. We're definitely on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I believe Instagram.
Perfect. Yep. And let's see, let me just pop into one here real quick. On Facebook, it's Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. It'll probably pull up on that way on Instagram too if you pull it up. But well, thanks again for being here and for the information and the work you and your team do to support our food freedoms.
Thank you for the work you're doing and for getting the word out there and for having us join you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. And everybody, so this is From the Farm. Go to fromthefarm.org. We have 100 producers in 35 states across the nation you can buy direct from, and get involved and follow us on Instagram, social media, From the Farm USA. I do most of my sharing on my personal page. When it comes to the policy work I'm doing, it's @J_Richards. And we just appreciate you guys getting behind our farmers and ranchers and making sure that we have food sovereignty in this country. So
Yeah.
thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
In 1930, there were 6 million farms in America. Today, that number has plummeted to 1.8 million. And now 85% of the beef in America is controlled by just 4 companies. That means fewer farmers have to produce more food, thus incentivizing them to produce a high quantity of food instead of high quality food. Plus, if something goes wrong, the 98% of us that don't grow food are at risk of starving. Yikes, that's dark. Let's go darker. A few very wealthy companies have control over all the food. And if North Korea has taught us anything, a centralized food supply can accidentally or intentionally kill a lot of people. The bottom line is this: you can't wait until hits the fan to figure out what your family's going to eat. But all hope is not lost. Here's the plan. It's called From the Farm, an industry-disrupting platform that directly connects customers and local farmers with a website that's as easy to use as Airbnb. From the Farm gives you fresher, higher quality foods, strengthens communities, and helps small farmers not only survive, but thrive. We can't do this alone. We need the strength of the American people behind us. Help us build a new food system that combines the wisdom of the past with the technology of the future. Investing in From the Farm isn't just a financial decision. It's an investment into our future, our small family farms, and our food sovereignty. Invest today.